you're right. That is a feature they can use to try to leverage their desire to have those files released. Now, the president himself has called for the release of more files, so that kind of muddies the water. I do think it's a short-term tactical move on the part of the Democrats, which will have short-term success because it is a story of media interest, and there is some division within the president's base over this topic. So I think they're trying to exploit this division.
Kamala Harris. This is it. She's not going to run for California governor next year. What do we read into that? Why do you think she's not going to do this?
Well, I'm not surprised she reached this decision. I think it's based on two things. One is she probably understood that she was lacking in sort of big donor support. She probably had some small donor base remaining from last year, but getting the big money is important, particularly in California, probably the most expensive state to run in the country. So that was a factor. And number two, I'm not sure she had it in her heart to be governor of California. I'm not sure she aspired to do that. I think she aspired to be a senator, which she became after being attorney general, and she wanted to be president, and she may want to be president again, but I don't think it was in her sort of wheelhouse in terms of her own goals. And if you don't have the fire burning in you to do that, you know that shows. And so I think she understood that was a problem. Plus, if she failed, then there's zero chance of her really running in 28 if that's what she really wants to do.
Is it ever possible in these situations, Jim, to work out where the buzz comes from, where the kind of feeling that she's going to go for it? Is it kind of her sending out a bit of a test balloon to see how the idea might go down? What would be your reading of that?
Well, I think she wants to stay in the conversation. She obviously didn't want to linger too long in this race because I think she knew in her heart she wasn't going to do it. So she played it, along for a little while as she considered it. But then once she decided not to go, I think it was smart to take her out of the running. But she's still potentially in the running in 28. And I think there's several factors for her in terms of looking ahead. She wants to be considered, even if she ultimately decides not to run for president. It makes sense on several levels. Number one, for speaking fees. She's making money going around the country giving speeches. Those fees drop if she's not a potential candidate in the future. And she probably is going to have a book deal soon to announce, and she's going to want to do a rollout once that book comes out. And the appetite for that is going to be bigger if she might run for president. And she wants to be mentioned, and as all politicians do. And so it's certainly too early for herself to take herself out of the running for 2028. She has every reason to stay in the conversation for that.
Yeah, and California is quite a good way to get attention, isn't it? As you say, it's so big, it's so powerful, it's so influential. Any sort of connection with a California electoral, with any level of sort of election in California feels like a good way to generate that conversation.
Yeah, and I'm sure she did consider it. It's funny, you look back, the other precedent here is Richard Nixon. He lost for president in 60. 2 years later, he did run for governor of California, and then he lost. And then he famously said, "You're not going to have Dick Nixon to kick around anymore." But then 6 years later, he knew enough not to run against Johnson in 64. So he stayed out of that race. But by 68, he came back as they called him the new Nixon. So whether there's going to be a new Kamala, we'll find out. But he came back and he won. It's a very interesting story about redemption in politics.
So then, we should consider the idea that Harris runs again to be president. And I'm going to say this, Jim. Theoretically, she shouldn't be running against Donald Trump again.
Right.
I mean, if he has his way, perhaps that'll be slightly different. Although I heard him nudge at the idea of him becoming the first Minister of Scotland the other day, which I was quite intrigued by, given his maternal heritage.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, right. Let's focus on this. So she may run again. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm intrigued by that because it feels to me as though her campaign last time did flounder somewhat. Now, I suppose there's spin on that, isn't there? Maybe she's learned lessons from the campaign against Trump that she would deploy more effectively next time. But does she have it? Is she presidential material?
I personally don't think so, but again, with the Nixon example, you never say never. But
Yeah.
I think she had two big flaws last year, and they could be flaws in the future. Number one, she was not a good campaigner. She didn't really come across well, and she did pretty well in one of the debates, but she shied away from the press. She didn't do interviews. And she did not prove to be, there was sort of an illusion about some buzz around her candidacy at first, but I think that was sort of a sugar high. That was sort of a false perception. I don't think ultimately she was a strong campaigner. She didn't really connect. She connected with elites, but she didn't connect with working people. at least not in the same way that Trump was able to. And the other factor, I think, was being too associated with kind of far left ideological issues, which I think was unfortunate for her. I think that really was a big part of her loss. So it was both a campaigning issue and a ideological issue, and she needs to shed both of those going into next cycle if she decides to run. She's got to be a better campaigner, and she's got to be better on the issues. Now she could do that, but if she's too wedded to that ideology, it's going to be a problem.
And Trump could do her a favour on both of those fronts. As we say, he shouldn't be running next time. This is his second
Right.
term, and he is quite a tour de force when it comes to campaigning. So, with him moved aside, the Republicans need to find a campaigner as well. Moreover, on the
Right.
ideology, actually, Trump's war on woke may leave something of a path for the Democrats to abandon some of that ideology, or at least abandon campaigning on it next time out. They could have license to move away from it, potentially.
Well, I do think the Democrats need to move away from the so-called woke ideology, and
Mm.
I think there are certain candidates who may do that, like Josh Shapiro. You really got to run on bread and butter, kitchen table issues, and not some sort of partisan ideological thing. Now, what's kind of mixing things up is Mamdani, who's running for mayor of New York, is himself very left and very progressive, and that may help him win in New York, strangely enough. But
Mm.
I think the national Democrats should not take the wrong lesson from that and should not move in that direction. And you're right, Donald Trump is not going to be on the ballot next time. J.D. Vance, I think, is a front runner. He has certain attributes, but he's not Donald Trump. And so there is an opening. I think this whole divide in America between elites and working class people is a real legitimate divide. And I think it's up for grabs from either party. I don't think it's necessarily an ideological divide between the two parties. I think it's a perception divide. And I think Kamala Harris was perceived to be with the elites, Trump more with the working class. Now, J.D. Vance, he comes out of the working class. He does have some advantages, but Democrats can't yield that ground to him. They need to come up with a candidate who can embrace working class concerns and appeal to the broad middle class.
I want to get your strategic view as well, Jim, if I may, on the Democrats and the Epstein files, the so-called Epstein files, which is a source of conversation, certainly in Washington, definitely here. I wonder how much it's cutting through with the ordinary people that we've already been referencing in this conversation. But I do want to consider how the Democrats are moving on this. So the Senate Minority Leader, this is Chuck Schumer, and indeed other Senate Democrats, have announced they're going to use the rule of five to force the Justice Department to release more documents related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. So this is basically where any 5 members of the Senate, Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee can request that the agencies provide information about any matter within the jurisdiction of the committee, which I think is quite a bold move from the Democrats to try and keep the issue front and centre. Are they sensing that it is damaging to Trump and so therefore are making plays on that basis?
Yeah, I think in the short term they are. My old boss Joe Lieberman helped create the Homeland Security Department, and he was chairman of that committee himself. And so you're right; that is a feature they can use to try to leverage their desire to have those files released. Now, the president himself has called for the release of more files, so that kind of muddies the water. I do think it's a short-term tactical move on the part of the Democrats, which will have short-term success because it is a story of media interest, and there is some division within the president's base over this topic. So I think they're trying to exploit this division. And heretofore, they haven't really had much to go on against the president. They really sort of have lost their footing in terms of any issue. This one allows them to coalesce in the short term to gain some points. But I don't think long term it's a winning issue in the midterms next year, nor in 2028. I think it's a tactical move on their part, but it's not a strategic move. They need to reground themselves with long-term strategic vision for the country, which is rooted in kitchen table issues, not conspiracies.
Jim, it's really good to speak to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, appreciate it.